So you talk a little bit about mental fog, which is interesting. So you were saying, was it on keto that people felt like mental fog was cleared a little bit?
Yeah, so one of the reported benefits of keto is kind of this mental clarity, and you hear that with intermittent fasting too.
Yeah.
That, if they're fasted, if they're in a keto state that, or ketosis, that they have this greater mental clarity. And I think that's interesting because, I haven't done that,
Sure.
but that's one of the reported benefits.
Gotcha. What do you think that's attributed to?
So there's a couple different ideas about what that is. A lot of it has to do with what your brain is running on. So in a fasted state or in a ketogenic state, which mimics fasting, is low carbohydrate. Your brain is running on something called ketones or ketone bodies, and our brains love to run on carbohydrates or sugar, glucose. And if we're not consuming that, then the only other way that we can kind of fuel our brains is through these ketones, because the fatty acids don't cross the blood-brain barrier. So our ketones are kind of our alternative fuel source, and so some people think that it has to do with the neural networking and how kind of our neurons are working in terms of our brain chemistry with those ketone bodies.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, you'll hear about, I think I heard like a TED Talk from some guy at Johns Hopkins about the mental benefits. He talked about in like the dark ages, putting somebody in like a jail cell when they were like acting crazy, so to speak, right? And they leave them in there for days until they calm down. And he was looking back on that and saying people like came down off of that like craziness that they had when they put them in there. And he was like attributing that to the clarity that came from being in a fasted state because they were put into a cell for 24 or 36 or 48 hours.
Right, so assuming that he was decently well fed when he went in there, he was probably running on, blood glucose at the time, and then after having fasted for so long, then his brain switched to running on ketones.
And that like mellows you out, or
it depends.
Leads to mental clarity? That's the thing that confuses me, is like, what's the like flip that switches there?
The trigger, yeah. So it depends on the person. So with women actually tend to be a little more edgy when we're in that fasted state, or you hear of people being hangry. So again, with women, our brains are a little more sensitive to those carbohydrate intakes as well as our thyroids. So the reason being, from an evolutionary perspective, women are in charge of carrying a baby, and so we need to make sure that we have plenty of food intake to support that baby if that is the case. And so if we have low carbohydrate intake, then our bodies tend to shut down a little bit more to try to preserve, or hold off on some of that, pregnancy. And so what we really want to look at is, are we giving the body the nutrients that it needs to support overall health? And for women, that includes being able to carry a baby. So for women, we tend to get more kind of edgy and sort of more mental fog when it comes to that, because again, our bodies aren't as kind of astute at running in that fasted state than men are.
Gotcha. Are you putting yourself at risk if you're doing an extreme diet, whether it be extreme fasting or carnivore or keto or only plant-based? Are you at risk early on of like messing up your thyroid and having dysfunction later on in life? And so
it's possible. Yeah, depending on what your dietary practices are, you can certainly be doing some damage. I came across a great research paper, and it's basically why women need carbs. And so they put a definite mark on a minimum for women on like 50 grams of carbohydrates per day, and that's absorbable carbs, so not counting fiber towards that. Because anything below that, our thyroid function starts to decrease. We start to get some menstrual cycle dysfunction and some other kind of hormonal imbalances that can be deleterious and problematic, especially if they're younger, premenopausal. We don't want to do any long-term damage for the sake of attempted body composition or weight loss or anything like that.
Yeah.